The Dip by Seth Godin. Just wanted to share my quick thoughts. It's just the second time I've finished reading this. So I guess just like a very basic summary of the book before I get into it is, for me, it's about knowing when to quit and when to stick at something, and sort of trying to double down and master like a specific area, or as like a lot of the advice you might hear in YouTube startup channels is like sort of trying to find your niche. And yeah, to be honest, although it's a short book, so it's just under 100 pages or so, and even for me as a slow reader, I can get through it like in a couple of days, reading chunks here and there. I've had like different takeaways from reading it each time, and it's a book I'm definitely going to go back to again. I would say it's mainly for if you're in maybe a marketing role or you're a creator especially. I think there's some like great takeaways and such information you can take from such a short book, and it's definitely worth considering if you're either in a marketing role or you're a creator or you're thinking about starting YouTube, but maybe you're just taking those first sort of stages. You're thinking about starting maybe your channel this year. I think it has some like key insights in this book that can be useful to yourself. So like one of the big takeaways for me is sort of knowing when to quit and knowing when to sort of push ahead. That's sort of like one of the key things I've sort of taken from the book. And other ways I sort of look at how it describes the dip is almost like when you're, say you're fresh, you're starting your career, you've just maybe started out in marketing, for example. At the very start it's very exciting and you're just learning so many different new things every single day. And just with that, it's just day after day, it's really, really exciting. You're learning. And then maybe about, it could be like 6 months or so later down the line, it starts to like slow down a bit. So you see that sort of curve in the graph as such, because you've maybe got some of like the basic insights to your career. You're starting to understand some of like the basics. You've got a lot of information and you feel like you're maybe not learning as fast. It mightn't be as exciting as it was back when you first started, like with anything, I suppose, when you settle into it. Parts of the excitement can dip down a little bit, and then you can sort of have those moments where you can sort of like dip down a little bit. You feel like maybe you're not learning as much, and then you almost realize you sort of feel like you look up and you can get to this point where you realize to like master that skill, everything you've learned so far, you feel like you've learned a lot. You're actually just at the very beginning, and there's almost like another like 50 mountains to climb. It's almost like you've just climbed the first hill towards the entire peak of getting up to Everest, and you're further away from the top. But another one which is interesting, because I only really took away from it recently, so the last time I read it, it's not something that sort of stuck with me as much the first time. And I believe this one's definitely would provide more value if you're a creator or if YouTube's something you're thinking about starting. And it's around when he talks about sort of mastery and being like the very best in your specific field. And especially in today's digital age, he sort of talks about how maybe it's just not good enough to be maybe second or third best, because your competitors are literally a search away, and then you can lose customers, your audience, just like that, because they've got so much choice out there. And I've sort of tied it to, I mean, if you've seen any videos on starting a YouTube channel in 2023, or how to grow your YouTube audience, or maybe advice for if you're just starting out on YouTube, a lot of people will focus on one area that crops up again and again and again, and that's finding your niche. And I think those 2 points that he ties together in his book about coming like the very best in a specific area, and the advice you hear around like sort of finding your niche in YouTube, I think tie together quite nicely. And I think that's why it struck with me as being so interesting this time around, whereas it's something to be honest, I sort of like half glossed over it the first time I read through it. And I think that's the value of coming back again to books you enjoy. So that in and of itself, I think, is a really interesting point that he makes. And yeah, I hear it a lot, and certainly advice worth looking into about, I mean, if you think about it, if you're trying to cover so many different areas. Say if you're starting out on YouTube and you're doing little bits of everything, when people are looking for specific things, if you're trying to like cover everything, you'll almost not be able to properly focus in on one area. So I mean, it could be anything. So maybe, like myself, if you're maybe in a marketing career, you enjoy that, you have all skills and experience around it, you can maybe focus in on a specific area where maybe you have more knowledge around. That could be anything from like SEO, email marketing, content marketing, social media marketing, and those areas. And then over time you can obviously expand into different areas and you can sort of change and adapt. But then I always think another area that's quite interesting is that when you think of niches, you tend to think of specific areas, but I always think another way to potentially look at it that I've heard a few times being mentioned is like almost being more true to yourself and being more open and honest and just being yourself, because ultimately no one else can be you and no one else will be able to provide like your sort of take on the world and that sort of advice. So it's just, you know, trying to balance those 2 points. But honestly, it's just really a short one, to be honest. I think it's a great book. It's one I'm planning to reread again later this year. And each time I come back to it, I feel like I get a slightly different insight from it. And I remember at one point in the book he talks about, I think it's a woodpecker. So if he pecks a little bit of one tree, moves over, pecks a little bit in another tree, he's not really going to get anywhere. But if he pecks like 10, 20,000 times in the same spot on that one tree, he's eventually going to get food. And then that again ties into like sort of finding your niche, so finding that specific area, growing like your audience around that, and just providing people with sort of like value and insight based on what you know, and instead of trying to just almost trying to help everyone, because if you're trying to help everyone in the world, it's literally impossible. You're not going to be able to do it. But if you may help a small group of people with a specific problem, it then becomes easier. So that's like one of the big things I've taken away from it myself this time. And again, I mean, I'm probably one of the slowest readers on the planet. And with it being only, I think it is under 100 pages. It's a quick read. So even if you're going off on a holiday, you've got maybe some time spared at lunch, you can just get through it very quickly. So definitely recommend it. If you're in a marketing role, you're maybe starting out on YouTube, or if you're a creator, I think it's just a quick, great sort of marketing related book that you can get a good bit of insight from, and it's something that I've learned a lot from in the past 2 times of reading it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.